called Progressive Policy Institute, that is a think tank based in Washington, and also a senior fellow Wharton Max Center for Technology Innovation. Michael was present also yesterday to our conference on big data, and it took the opportunity to have a more in-depth discussion with some of the leading thinkers in Italy regarding not only technology, but how technology is innovating the business life and the policy, and hopefully also the country where we live. We have agreed that Michael will make an introductory speech based on the paper and also with other comments. Then, as I was saying before, we had a preliminary list of people that have asked to make some consideration, and I was checking before what the people that are on the list, just to let you know, is Professor Michelis, Professor Carlo Alberto Carnevale Maffè, correct? And also Professor Prini, and I don't know if it's Professor Paolo Gila, or Mr. Paolo Gila. These are the lists that I have here that I already had to speak. If you agree, after Michael, after the short speech, if you agree, we plan to give you at the beginning 10 minutes to provide the introduction, then we open the discussion. Of course, we can go back again to the discussion. There are any other thing that you want to? Do you think that we have to introduce each other, or is it better that when somebody speaks, we introduce himself? Okay. So please, Michael, give you the table.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here this morning. Thank you to the Innovation Group and Think Foundation for inviting me to Italy. I'm very glad to be here and to sort of share thoughts about the data-driven economy, both plus and minus. And a couple of things in the news, of course. Everybody is familiar with the data-driven spying scandal now going on in the U.S. But a very interesting article in this morning's Wall Street Journal. Traders routinely paying for early peek at key economic data. Okay, this is not data that is released by the government, but economic indexes that are released by various non-governmental agencies in the U.S. It turns out that the traders are paying to sort of get the data 2 seconds early, 1 second early, half a second early to enable them to trade against it. Very, very interesting and important. After I finish here today, I intend to sort of go write a blog item or a Twitter about the importance of this. I think we've entered a very, can I have the next slide, please? Okay. We've entered a very interesting period in the evolution of the economy where we're moving beyond goods and services into data. And what I'm going to do today is give an expanded version of the talk that I gave yesterday with actually a lot more economic details about what the data-driven economy looks like. So it's going to have 3 phases here. One is understanding the data-driven economy. The other is the importance of data for the enterprise. I'm also going to talk a bit about trade. And the third is how do we think about the data-driven economy relative to government. Next slide, please. Okay, you know, what's interesting and important here is that we've lived for the last 70 years with an economy, both in Europe and in the U.S., which is built around goods and services. So we started with the industrial economy, steam mills, steel mills, railroads, heavy industry, cars, and so forth. And so we're very used to thinking about the production and use of goods as an important pillar of our economy. Next slide, please. Then, sort of basically since the 1970s, at least in the U.S., we've grown used to thinking of services as an important pillar of the economy as well, retailing, finance, healthcare, all sorts of services. If you look at any of the economic data that's put out either by the U.S., by the EU, by individual national economies, it's all divided into goods and services. Employment is divided into goods and services. The production is divided into goods and services. This is the lens through which we see the world. And so when you go and you sort of ask companies, what do you do? They're going to tell you, well, we make goods or we provide services. Next slide, please. My claim is that we've entered into a new world where data, the production and use of data is just as important as the production of goods and services. Now, you know, on one hand, this may not be very surprising because we all deal with data all the time. On the other hand, this is actually a very big step conceptually forward, because when we think about what the purpose of national economies are, what generates jobs, what generates prosperity, what it says is that we can achieve prosperity not simply through the production and export of goods, not through the production of export and services, but through the production and export and consumption of data as well. That is, it leads us to identify new national assets that can actually be used in the future. It's a different way of thinking about not just the economy, but economic policy. Next slide, please. This is a fundamental statement of the data-driven economy. Okay, the production and use of data is a fundamental component of economic value creation, just like the production and use of goods and services. Let me give you a strange but accurate example. You can go on YouTube now, and you can find videos of cats. Many videos of cats. You can find videos of grumpy cats. You can find videos of happy cats. You can find videos of cats that have millions of views to them. There are people who are out there watching cats all day. Now, they're not paying for it. How then shall we view this consumption of cat videos in the economics? This is pure data transfer. There is nothing else going on. Is this any better or worse than spending your time going skiing or sitting outside sipping a nice beverage or any other thing that you might be doing that consumes your time and money? The fact of the matter is that I would argue, no, this is in fact no different. Now let's change the example a little bit. Let's suppose that somebody goes on YouTube and instead of pulling up a video of cats, you pull up a video of computer science lectures at Stanford University. You can see those, they're there. It's the same data. You're not paying for it. Is this a valuable activity or not? Pure data consumption, it is human capital and investment. No different than if you went into a classroom and learned the same material. I can go through example after example where we have managed to separate out the production, use, consumption, and investment in data separate from anything else, and it has value. It is valuable. Next slide, please. So data-driven value creation, what I've done is I've mapped it into sort of the various components of the economy: consumption, investment, government, and trade. So we can have the provision of data to customers. People consume health-related information, for example. They consume cat videos. They consume information on tourism. Okay, the data, you know, the NSA didn't like it. They're going to just give me 1 second, and if they can't, we'll just keep going. Alas. Okay, let's just keep going then, and then let them work on it. Okay, the provision of data to consumers, enterprise investment in data, things like marketing databases, genomic databases, all the information that companies have that are in their databases is valuable as well. Then there's the role of government in providing information, data. As we go forward, we may discover that the single most important role the government has is, in fact, data provider and vetter. And finally, something that is extremely important and extremely unknown, okay, which is cross-border trade in data. Now, which piece did you give up? Okay, there's a piece we just came out with. Actually, it's actually not officially on our website. We keep coming out. We keep coming out with working paper versions called Data Growth and Trade. I'm going to speak a little bit about cross-border trade and data. Now, data is different than goods and services. Goods are tangible and they can be stored. Keep going. Good. Goods are tangible and can be stored. Services are intangible and cannot be stored because they're connected with people's services. And data is intangible and can easily be stored. So what I'm proposing is that the vision of the economy into goods-producing industries, services-producing industries, and data-producing industries, where these days the data-producing industries are growing far faster than the other two, and they have a location which is not as easily outsourced. Next slide, please. Now, one important note here, and this is going to come up over and over again, our economic systems and our business accounting are not designed at this point to sort of handle data. It is ironic. Our data does not include data about data. Now, if this is not a surprise, the system of national accounts that we still use today was originally designed in the 1930s. It had two purposes, really. One is to sort of enable the tracking of the Great Depression, and the other was actually to sort of enable countries to sort of track their war-fighting capabilities. Right now, data has a very different set of properties in goods and services. It's not easy to assign a monetary value to them. It's not easy to unbundle data from goods and services, and the fact is it's even hard to track which direction data is flowing in. So I am, if not foolhardy. Next slide, please. Okay. Now that I've announced how difficult it is to track data, I'm going to give you some examples of how I've tried to track. Let me give you a little bit of my history so you can actually understand why I'm sort of willing to do this. Is that for 20 years, I was the chief economics writer for Business Week in the U.S. One of the things that we did was we tried to go places that academic economists would not go in order to sort of give people better insights. And then what I sort of learned was that very often there's ways of getting at some economic truths very early on. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how data-driven growth is important. How many people in this room have smartphones? Okay, you guys are pretty much almost everybody. How many smartphones? How many smartphones? How much time during the day do you spend looking at your smartphone? Too much. Quite a lot. Okay. Now, the fact of the matter is every time you look at your smartphone, you are consuming data. Does this consumption of data leave a monetary footprint anywhere? Depending on your data plan, probably not. Okay? It's, you know, the GDP is based on tracking monetary footprints. You're looking at your consumption of data is not being directly monitored. In fact, there are ways of looking, you know, there are surveys, however, that is done about, you know, internet usage, broadband usage, smartphone usage. So we can actually see how much the time that you are spending online, either mobile or broadband fixed, is increasing over time. If we assume that your time has a value, which I assume that for most of the people in this room does, it should be, we can actually sort of estimate what the contribution is of your consumption of data is to GDP if we were actually measuring it. Now, this is a fairly straightforward, though ugly procedure. Okay, it's an ugly procedure in the sense that we don't actually really know. There's no systems in place, but we could sort of make a reasonable guess. And so for the U.S., in the first 2 quarters of 2012, when we at the Progressive Policy Institute in D.C. made this calculation, we discovered that the unmeasured use of data added about a ½ percentage point to GDP growth in the U.S. Now, why is the first 2 quarters of 2012 interesting? Well, remember, the presidential election, in the U.S. happened in November 2012. And we know from some economic research that voters in the U.S. are very sensitive to what the economy is in the spring or summer leading up to the election. So what this is saying is that the U.S. economy was actually stronger, that's about 25% stronger than it seemed at the time. This might be one of the factors help accounting for why President Obama won so easily in the election, that people actually felt that the economy was stronger. I do not have the figures yet for Europe. It would be interesting to see whether a comparable effect occurs, whether or not which European economies are actually stronger than it seems because of the unmeasured use of data. This is about measuring the fastest growing part of the economy. Now, I should say a word before going on about employment. Is the data-driven economy generating employment? I've done 2 studies for the U.S. on the number of jobs created by the app economy. The app economy is all the jobs having to do with creation of mobile apps, their distribution, and so forth. I was able to sort of get at this number by using help wanted ads. I did a search I used the help wanted ads to help me identify jobs that used mobile app-related skills. This, in theory, could be done for any country. Okay? We're doing this at this point for the UK with a grant from Nesta, the Innovation Foundation there. What we discovered in the U.S. is that the app economy included about 500,000 jobs. That is to say, there were, this made the app industry, which includes not just small app companies, but also app hiring by large companies, one of the fastest growing industries in the U.S. The creation of 500,000 jobs is nothing to be sneezed at this day and age. It turns out that that this appears to sort of be growing at a substantial rate, the number of jobs in the app economy, far faster than the overall job. And that what is also true is that the computer and mathematical occupations are heavily biased towards young workers. So this is a field, an area which is capable of employing young workers. One side note here, which I mentioned at yesterday's talk, which is Edward Snowden, the whistleblower. Of course, was not a college graduate, and he was earning a sizable salary working for Booz Allen in excess of 6 figures. So, in essence, these jobs were exactly what we've all been looking for: well-paying jobs for young people that did not require a college degree. If we can only have more of those, we'd be okay. Next slide, please. Now let me talk about trade, which is extremely interesting and important. If I was to look at the international trade report for the European Union, or for the U.S., or for Japan, I would see exports and imports of goods. I would see exports and imports of services. I would not see a single line for the exports or imports of data. It does not exist. Nobody tracks it. Nobody officially, governmentally tracks it. There's some consulting firms that do track it. So it turns out that between 2008 and 2012, global demand for cross-border bandwidth rose at a 49% annual rate. Now, in fact, I'm using the exact terminology here. These are this is roughly the same size as the flows. It wasn't simply global demand, it was the actual flows. Most of these flows are going through submarine cables and not satellites. New cables are being built all the time. Existing cables are being upgraded at a very rapid pace. Next slide, please. So in fact, what we discover if we compare trade and world trade and data versus goods and services over this period, cross-border data flows grew by an average annual rate of 49%. Cross-border flows of goods and services grew at a rate of 2.4%. If you are looking for the industry, the area that is going to propel growth in the future, it is a data-driven part of the economy. This is a very important chart. This chart is going to influence the trade negotiations between the U.S. and Europe, because it's going to turn out, rather than agriculture being the key sticking point, it's going to be data. This is also going to tell us something about which regions of the world are going to prosper, because the ones that can benefit from the cross-border data flows are the economies that have the best chance of prospering going forward. We've moved out of the era where, outsourcing of goods and services is something which has taken place already. The question is, what's going to happen to the data? Go on to the next slide, please. Now, I want to actually sort of make a point here about data flows. It's not in this presentation, but it's a very important point. I can, from where I sit right here, I could access sites in the U.S. I can access sites in Europe. It turns out that, in fact, there's a sizable lag if I access sites in the U.S. There's a bigger lag if I access sites in Asia. The way that the global economy of data is developing is that large providers are setting up data centers across the world. What is the role of these data centers? The prime role of these data centers is not to collect data. The prime role is to replicate data from the rest of the world and bring it closer. So remember those cat videos that I was talking about, or the Stanford computer science video. If I'm a young student in Italy and I access that computer science video from Stanford, what is happening is that I am actually accessing, most likely, a Google server in Europe and not the original set of Google servers in California. There's been an investment made to bring these closer to reduce the lags. The lags on for each individual bit and byte is small, but they add up quite large over time. You can think of international trade in data in part as bringing data closer to the ultimate user, either through data centers or through content delivery networks and so forth. So if you have access to a closed-in data center, what's happened is that the information, the data, and the rest of the world has been brought closer. So that 49% is actually an underestimate of the growth in data. What is really happening is that YouTube cat video has been moved once from the U.S., say, to a server in Ireland, okay, and then replicated many times. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, why is this cross-border data flow not being counted? It's actually very interesting, the reasons why. Okay, why is it that I could sit here and access a site, say, in China, without paying anything extra? The reason why is because telecom operators, internet providers, the backbone operators very often exchange data without a charge. That's called peering. Okay? So basically what happened is that if you follow, if I sort of shipped, a cheap trinket, okay, from China to the U.S. to Europe, and every step along the way it would be stamped, registered for customs, somebody would have to pay some money, okay, there'd be forms that filled out. Those data bits that cross borders that are valuable don't have to pay any customs declarations, okay? They're not counted anywhere. What happens is if I may be in the U.S., say, using AT&T. AT&T may own its own submarine cable. It doesn't have to pay itself any money. The bit gets into the UK or it gets into France and then switches to a European provider, also without any money exchanging hands. There's no monetary footprint out there for these data flows, and that's not even counting all the private networks. So right now there's an invisible economy out there of cross-border valuable data flowing across borders that is not being counted anywhere. Next slide, please. Now I did in the paper, which is, if anybody's interested, please give me your card and I'll send you a copy of the current working paper, Data Trade and Growth. I did a couple of estimates comparing cross-border data flows to data flows within an economy. And so this requires many heroic assumptions to do. It's not an easy calculation. And what I got was that in 2012, that cross-border data flows were roughly 16% of U.S. total IP traffic. Next slide, please. Fascinatingly enough, this is roughly about the size of goods and services trade as a share of GDP as well. So I don't know if this is reassuring or not, but it's roughly the same order of magnitude. In Europe, it was a slightly lower share. So it's like roughly 16% for the U.S., roughly 13% for Europe after I've taken out all the intra-Europe connections. I don't know quite what to make of this number yet, whether it's actually meaningful. Next slide, please. Think about government for a second. Government is very much in the news these days, government and data. We have three major issues here, okay? One is privacy, one is trade, and the other we'll just call government spying. Why not? Okay. So we at the Progressive Policy Institute have been very involved in questions of privacy. Now, privacy when it comes to data is extremely important. There's a very large national component to it, cultural component. It's difficult. You know, different countries have different attitudes. It is, if you think about the way that I describe cross-border trade and data as being built around, say, data centers and replication of data, what we're saying basically is that the role that data flow goes both ways. When you have traded data, what's happening is that data from the rest of the world is coming in. Data from your country is going out. An interesting question is what is the balance? How valuable is that data access to the rest of the world, you know, without lags? Okay. Now, if at any point we were to sort of cut off the cross-border flows of data, what do you think would happen to the national economy? Not very good at this point. The cross-border flows of data are extremely important to running the economy, financial sector, manufacturing, all sorts of areas. So the interesting question about privacy is a trade-off between privacy and growth. Now, we can almost turn this into a slider. You could make a choice and you could see which point along the spectrum that you want to be. It's fairly clear that if left to their individual devices, people will generally choose access to data over privacy. Now the question is that the right choice? I have spent a lot of time over the last year talking in Brussels and Berlin and around Europe on this question, and my take on this is very simple. It's a choice that everybody has to make. Every country, every region has to make about what is appropriate for them, about the trade-off between privacy and growth. You know, for my part, I believe that the Western economies at this point face a fundamental challenge in terms of whether our model is going to work going forward. And one of the most important things we can do is foster growth in the leading sectors that are both generating jobs and generating GDP growth. So from my point of view, I think that the slider should be pushed over in favor of growth rather than privacy. But this, as I say, this is a decision that everybody's got to make individually. We can talk more later if you'd like about, you know, the overall question of privacy. Trade. The last few trade rounds have been fought over agriculture, they've been fought over goods, they've been fought over services. Data is different. The reason why data is different is because data can be replicated. So that once you've traded for data, you can replicate it many, many times. You can get tremendous gains in growth from trade in data that you cannot get from trade in goods or trade in services. It is going to turn out that the countries that are open to trade in data are going to be the ones that are successful going forward. Just think about mobile apps. You could have somebody in a small town write a mobile app which sells globally, which brings an enormous amount of foreign exchange without having them having to leave their home. It is a paradigm shifter. It is a different way of thinking about things. What happens is that the size of the market is global. The size that can be accessed by good, smart workers is global. And small businesses can be just as powerful as big businesses. This is really something that changes the dynamics of what happens to small businesses in a global economy. Finally, let's get to the government spying. The recent revelations were, in fact, the oddest of revelations, in the sense that they were both completely unsurprising and completely surprising at the same time. No one, I'm sure, is surprised that the U.S. government was engaged in cyber monitoring. No one, I'm sure, would be surprised to find out that the Chinese were involved in the same thing. No one, I'm sure, will be surprised to find out that the Russians were involved in the same thing. Still, the revelations were surprising. Is it surprising, you know, is the scope surprising? you know, when I'm online, I don't think of privacy versus no privacy. I think of how much work is it going to take somebody to break my privacy, and is it worth it to them? What do I have that needs to be concealed? What do I need that needs to be kept private? Because you can be sure that if the U.S. government wanted to find out something about me, they could. If the U.S. government wanted to find out something about you, they could. If the Chinese government wanted to find out, I've sort of seen funny, you know, articles arguing that the only difference between the Chinese and the American spying is that the Chinese were sort of spying on the right things. More effectively. I think the way that I tend to think about this is that you know, we're sort of in the early days of the equivalent of industrial warfare, where people are still trying to work out what's kind of proper and what isn't. It is, you know, this may help explain something which has been baffling to everybody, which is why didn't we see more terrorist attacks after 9/11? Okay, and there's really three possibilities. One is that there were fewer terrorists out there than we thought. Two is that terrorism on a national scale is harder than it seems. And the third is that the U.S. government, military and intelligence operations were actually more effective than it seemed. As far as I can see, there's really only three. Those are really only those are the three exhaustive possibilities. To me, these revelations raise the Bayesian odds on the third, as opposed to any other. It also suggests that part of the strength of the U.S. information technology industry actually rests on funding from the government. I think it's important to understand, and I wasn't actually joking. Well, I was partly joking. I mean, I've got a 23-year-old son and a 21-year-old daughter, you know, who have jobs, but it's a difficult market out there. And I'm actually wasn't only half joking about the creation of jobs for sort of young people, which only have, you know, less than a college education. These are all things that we have to think about as we think about the economy going forward. Data, you can sort of say basically, the era of goods production is not over, but the era of the growth of goods production is over. The era of service production is not over, but the era of rapidly expanding service production may be over. The global growth in developed countries is going to come from the data sector, one way or another. That's what's happening in the U.S. at this point, both in jobs and in output. What the implications are for Europe and for Italy, I couldn't quite say, but I do say if I look at the U.S. economy, I can sort of see where growth is coming. I think I'll stop right there.
Okay.
Oh, let me just say, I won't stop right there. Let me just say one word about the institution. I'm the Chief Economic Strategist for the Progressive Policy Institute. We're a Washington, D.C. think tank. We're middle of the road. We're Democratic leaning. We believe in innovation and growth and pro-market, but within the context of good social values. Thank you. Well, we tried a bit.
Thank you, Michael. You said a lot of social things, and there are people here that we can comment and integrate. So if you agree, we can start with the discussion and giving the word to the people that already booked the slots. So I will start with Giorgio Michelis.
Okay, thank you. I like very much both the people and the talk.
I need an introduction so I can write it down.
for two reasons. One, for some...
Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Okay. I am Giorgio de Michelis. I am professor at the University of MilanoBicocca. I am working in computer science. I am something in the middle between an interaction designer and a developer of new applications. So I'm not generally working on interpreting and analyzing what happens, but more in designing. But I have some, so I like the talk because it gave me 2 or 3 elements that I was not thinking about, on which I can spend my attempts to understand. And on the other side, because puts new light on something on which I was thinking. And so it's interesting to cross 2 different ways for looking to something that happens around us. I start with a question. You are speaking about data and not about information. And that is an interesting point because in many cases your examples are strictly related to information, not to data. So, but since I understand that for computing and having a quantity, data are very much better than information, I can understand that in some sense the impact is strictly related to the value of the information contained in the data. And also the last observation that you did, that spying people need to do it well, otherwise it doesn't make any sense that is related with the information itself.
I'm not going to sort of belabor this point of the data versus information. Think about the cat videos.
Yes.
Okay. You know, we've adopted the notion that information is only valuable if it has a monetary value. You know, but imagine that I was sitting here wearing an ugly shirt.
Yes.
Okay. Now I might be wearing an ugly shirt that really makes me look horrible. Now, when I bought this shirt, okay, this ugly shirt, it got counted in GDP just as if it was a shirt that was flattering to me. We don't make any attempt when we calculate GDP to sort of assess the underlying true value. And so what I'm saying is just, well, actually, I'm going to actually give, you actually have to read the other paper. When I talk about the data replication, the value of trade there is the difference in the value of bringing the data closer. Okay. So in some sense, I end up doing first differences on that to eliminate your question. But it raises a fundamental question. We have these very large data flows, and people tend to poo-poo them by saying, oh, that's just cat videos flowing back and forth across these lines. Who is to say what is valuable? They're being moved, somebody is consuming them. They only are being moved because there's a consumption there. In the same way, okay, the data that the U.S. government collected, which may or may not have been valuable, was data that they collected, and it was sort of economically powerful force. The only reason I'm sort of continuing this is a very important sort of theme here, okay, in terms of economic measurement, in terms of understanding the contribution of an ugly shirt to the economy is the same as the contribution of a cat video. You know, it's interesting. I gave it when we were just in Brussels, okay, and at a conference talking about cat videos. One woman stood up and she said, "You know, I watch those cat videos all the time. I have cats, and I love those cat videos, and my cats love those cat videos." Okay, the conversation went downhill.
Okay, now I think that there is one point that is related to the problem of measuring. Is that I think that the situation with respect to both the data production and data flow is that we are still in a very inefficient way of doing both things. And so that until we don't have a development of both data creation and data distribution and data flows, we will have that the measure of data sometimes measure bigger flows than what is needed, and that look into the information is a complementary view alone to try to understand what is really changing the economy and what is instead a sort of noise due to the fact that networks today are so inexpensive for most of the people using them. That is the first point. The second point that is for me quite interesting is that if you look to the production of these data, that these can be divided, the separation is not so clear, in one part that is created by default, is created by actions that have a different purpose than creating data. Typically is all what I do for buying services and so on, that I am not willing to create data. I am willing to buy a book, but that's the information that I don't have becomes for better information. That is interesting because all this part is going to generate two different flows or two different ways of using it. One is most of us use this type of information in an invisible way. When I enter in Amazon, I don't need to give them some information because I gave it the first time, and from that time I don't use it anymore. And that makes my self-production of services quite very much more efficient than before. And so I like it. It's like Bancomat, cash dispenser. In the cash dispenser, I do everything, but I spend less time, so I'm happy. The second is instead that there is real data production. That means there are people observing phenomena or registering them and then structuring this data and putting it in use for other people. The two sets of data are frequently linked, even if you are not yet very much able to create some real information linking this data, but that is the idea. That what people does plus what I get in terms of information will increase my capability, and the cross-border information is practically a combination of the two. But in any case, that means that the production of data is the part that is by default. It's difficult to consider it a production of data because somehow it's not originated as a production of data. In terms of flows, as I said, there is instead that some flow of data is somehow invisible to users. They generate the flow, but they are not interested in seeing the data. And the other part is instead that they generate the flow and they want to see the data in order to make analysis of them and so on. That is, tells us that the best way probably for understanding it that data are a double component. One is that they are the main actor of the transformation of the services. Because when service becomes self-service, there are data, always. When we do by ourselves, if you go to the Amazon cloud, you configure your system, you do it by yourself. Amazon is not doing anything but for creating the infrastructure. And so all the flow of data is generated by you. On the other side, instead, if you are going to IBM and you buy cloud from IBM, you speak a lot with them because they are delivering you service in the classical terms. There is a person that tells you, you can trust on me, we are IBM, we give service in the traditional form. There is another part that instead is the flow of data for people who are taking decisions, generating actions, and so on. That is instead real. The flow of data has a value, but it's more data like good. It's a particular type of material good. I buy data because I need them for doing something. I need a set of potential customers and so on. So in this way, you can understand that probably data are dividing themselves in the two corners that before, but that I probably you don't like it because somehow it's not putting in front of us the third component as something different from the other two. But I think that the two complementary views are needed in order to try to help ourselves to understand what is really happening at this level, because I am still seeing a lot of things happening that probably will not happen next 20 years.
Some comment?
No, actually, the comment I made sort of in the middle. So let's keep going.
Okay. Carlo Alberto.
Thank you. Roberto, Carnevale, I teach strategy at Bocconi University. I have three issues for you. The first is facts. One of the most interesting arguments you can imagine on the agenda of politicians today is not the classification of data, but rather the taxation of data. I mean, when an economic sector becomes relevant, all of a sudden, okay, politician becomes interested in that thing, not because of the intrinsic value, but because of taxability.
Are you talking about the French paper?
Just, yeah, French paper.
They quoted, the French paper actually quoted my thesis a lot. In argument. I'm not sure.
I've been working with Google in the last for preventing any fiscal attack against the principle of data taxation. So we come back to the nature, the economic, the legal nature of ownership, trade, location of data, applicable law, jurisdiction of data. There's a little thing to say. Second element, the economic nature of data consumption and its externalities, because your classification of data as a third category lies on an assumption that they are intangible, therefore, but they are storable. Okay, and I think that there is a third element to be taken here into consideration, because it is the economic function of the consumption that makes the difference, rather than the status itself of data. Let me come back to this. The third element is about public policy and public accounting of data as an element of wealth. Okay? And the new wealth of nation is in between data and information. So we need to issue clear guidelines. We altogether for public policy to account correctly for data. Let me start with data ownership, access, trade, and taxation. Okay? The problem here is that the transfer of property of data is a problem, because you encounter the problem of duplication and distribution. The economics of distribution and duplication of data are such that the variable cost of trade, of data trade, duplication are negligible, and it's all sunk cost and fixed cost. So anytime you actually transfer data or you get access to the individual data, you are actually transferring property. There is very little difference between access and property transfer. Okay, and this delicate situation becomes a problem when you have to taxate, because what does it mean to make taxation on Google data in Italy versus California or Cayman? Where is the value added actually accruing? Is transfer of data, is a transfer of property, is just an access? I think we should raise the issue of an institutional charter of data status at the WTO level. I think it's a relevant issue that needs to be somewhat regulated, lightly regulated. So I think you have an argument here that this argument should be put on the table of WTO to avoid double taxation, to clarify once for all the issue of where is the value added, what is the applicable law, the jurisdiction on data, because if data is a new sector, that's your claim. Okay, data is a new sector of the economy. Then I'm going to ask you, who are the players? What's the relevant market? Is there any dominant position? Is there any antitrust implication to be taken? And you're opening the Pandora box, my friend, and be careful, because you get politicians and lawyers.
Politicians and lawyers
can recommend. The issue of what kind of economic animal is data in terms of taxation, in terms of antitrust, in terms of ownership, duplication rights, the legal rights of applicable. I think there is a big issue which goes beyond your categorization. Data are a third leg of the economy. Second issue, you are classifying data as a third category because you say they are intangible but storable. Okay, I don't think that is the nature of intangibility, but rather the consumption function of data that makes the difference between goods and data. Data are information goods, therefore they are experience goods. Therefore, consumption is not a value destroying function, it's a value adding function. Actually, the externality of data consumption become data themselves. So every time you access the famous cat video sitting on the table, okay, you're actually creating involuntary data. So the consumption itself is a misplaced term. And you're not consuming anything. Indeed, the entity, the economic entity, actually gets enriched, not consumed. So if data consumption is not a negative value added economic function, how can we treat it? Because all the consumers are actually producers, as you probably know. So there is an issue of who contributes to what. Probably the right definition of data is not like a third leg, but rather as goods with a positive consumption function, rather than a third database of intangibility, which is honestly kind of more philosophical than economic. Okay? Whereas that is the inversion of the economic function is very tangible. Tangible and material is not immaterial. Intangibility is philosophy. Economic value added is money, and it becomes taxation, by the way. Third element, and then I conclude, is then you said that you lean towards the Democrats, so you're the guy that are interested in more taxation, and that's what we understand from Europe. No, just kidding. Final is how can we lay the foundation for a rational, understandable public policy on data treatment and spying and whatsoever. The statement you can't have 100% privacy and 100% security or free trade is, for my understanding, is by Obama last week, is a clear set of the trade-off. So what would be a proposal? Why don't we propose to set up a balance sheet of data? Because data are not just assets, but they're also liabilities. Okay? They embody liabilities in terms of right of representation, right of ownership, consequences of access to data. So they actually allow for creation of a balance sheet. So why don't we suggest to public policy politicians to lay their foundation on privacy, not on philosophical argument only, but rather on a robust economic theory of data as elements of balance sheet. There is an asset side, there's a liability side. You have to decide which balance. Okay? You want them to be less liable than possible, therefore there are no assets or a minimum asset possible. You want to extract the maximum value from your asset, the liability. Okay? You decide the line. Who decides the line? Everybody, you understand, but on the same methodology of this. With you as an individual should be allowed to decide which is the appropriate level of the balance between asset and liability of his own data at every company. So you create this way, you create a market of data which is widely regulated. It's not a state monopoly. It's not prohibitionism. It's not arbitrarily defined as this is the right amount of data that needs to be circulated because the government has decided. So it should be a market with a free price of the value of data. You set the price of your data. Okay, with Google, the price is zero because it's subsidized with your access to Gmail or Google Maps. Okay, it's basically you get your privacy data traded free of charge with no financial implication, just because you have the access of the information of the service. So why don't we just structure this in a public policy framework? So everything becomes clear. There is a price of your privacy, which is zero if it's subsidized by other means and services, or there is a positive price if you think you can deserve some. So I don't know, coupons of data at any grocery store for your labels, okay? Or public price if the data are physical data or health data, because of course they are sensitive and therefore should be treated with a different currency, which is the currency of freedom. So why don't we suggest we make a step forward with respect to your paper here, and we propose that not just the general implication for public policy, but really a clear framework, a rational, measurable, and we make data market a liquid, transparent, and fair market.
Thank you for those very interesting comments. I just wanted to make one, I don't know objection, but sort of an addition. So data is intangible, it's storable, it's replicable at relatively low cost. And so, you know, economics tells us that if something is replicable at relatively low cost,
Of course.
well, no, I would sort of say that we've got a genuine sort of, suppose that the data is in the U.S. and it wants to be used in Europe, like that computer science class video. It's worth it to sort of spend some money to sort of move it closer to the ultimate consumer. That is to say, the same bits and bytes are more valuable if they are closer, there's fewer lags, it's more worthwhile. What we see across the world at this point is that multinationals survive in part by moving data production techniques from country to country at a relatively low cost that enables them to take advantage of labor in other places, improve productivity growth, and so forth. So we have kind of a fundamental and interesting question. Your balance sheet idea, while interesting, is still stuck in the 20th century. Okay, you're still stuck in the issue where things cannot be replicated. Your right-hand side, your assets, I can move them, replicate them to someplace else, and all of a sudden they become, the value has increased. Okay, so you don't just keep, it doesn't just sort of stay stable. I think as we think about tax policy, as we think about various policies, we want to be able to say, how do we ensure that all of the useful information in one place is easily accessible at a low cost someplace else? I'm thinking, for example, about, say, a medical database. You know, very extensive in the U.S. that sort of could have application, or an engineering database that could have applications in Europe. Question is how to sort of ensure that either by our tax policy or by other policies that we do not slow down the expansion, the replication, the positively beneficial replication of information. Now the question that you raise about it speeds up my time at the ATM. Now we've never included, nobody has, theoretically possible, nobody has included self-production as part of GDP. It would be very interesting at this point to sort of do that, you know, because then that sort of gives you a framework to think about the sort of production of data by individuals as well. Then we'd be able to sort of see what the true value of time and you know, and the use of information and data in that context. So I'm all for kind of proceeding forward with a more extensive articulation here, but I think one has to understand that barriers to the replication of data, okay, if they sort of cut off the replication of useful data, is very problematic for sort of economic growth. And we sort of have to kind of think about what our perspectives are here.
Thank you. We move to some others. I have Paolo Gila.
Thank you to me. Thank you to Michael. I am Paolo Gila. I'm a journalist. I'm working in Rai, Italian television.
You're not a recovering journalist like I am, but you're still
right, but I tend to find myself observer of economic trends. I prepared a document which you now read, and if you want, I can send you. Please. There are at least two issues to discuss about the big data that need, in my opinion, further analysis. The first one concerns the electricity current, and the second one is about data pooling. To an increasing volume of data and information circulating on the web, and that the web itself depends, corresponds to an increasing need of new and more sophisticated ways of recording and storage. As a consequence, it is necessary to implement information architecture that works 24 hours, 24 hours, 7 days, vacation included. Several clusters are located in different areas of the world, especially in the northern region, throughout their cooling systems. To achieve this goal, we need electricity. I try to gather information about the amount of electricity used by database located in the most industrialized countries. There are different data, but they all agree upon the tendency to grow. The big data system is not only complex, it requires a lot of energy. How long time is it sustainable? To correctly analyze this issue, it will be of crucial importance to measure a hypothetical cost of energy terabyte and to locate in time the growth curves of the data volume with the one of cost per unit. There is a second question related to the first one. It is about the quality of data. Which are the quality data to safeguard? And the ones that we can forget about. Dealing with data also means to generate a priority scale by quantity and quality, as we do in economics and statistics. This is a new field of analysis that requires many subjects to merge in order to create new parameters of evaluation, not to drown in a huge storage. It is the man who has to sit on top of the elephant and guide it, not the other way around. So the question, in my opinion, like observer, is to create a new knowledge model, new management paradigm, new governance schemes, and the focus is to create new indicators. We need new indicators. Without indicators, we can do nothing. I think to the relation between data and energy, the cost, and in second time, probably the relation between data and trend of trading. In conclusion, I can show you some sources. By Paolo Gila of Bocconi, data web storage was 2 years ago 500 trillions of gigabytes, and there will be 2,500 trillions gigabytes in 2050. The second time, OECD, the Organization of Economic Country Development, the traffic on internet has been doubling every 100 days. And in Italy, we have a budget for energy consumption in IT around 15% of production budgeting in industrial costs. Quindi l'appunto è l'Associazione Generale della Domanda Elettrica. So, what do you think about the problem to measure the big data in relation with the trend of the economy?
Let me just thank you very much for the comments. I think that both of the comments were very interesting and important. There is no doubt that that the way that the internet is developing at this point requires large amounts of data, large amounts of electric consumption. I think that has to be traded off carefully against the question about whether it enables less travel and less trade. I think we're actually looking less trade of physical goods. So that is to say, if we were to have fewer meetings, global meetings, because of this, I don't know what the trade-off would be energy-wise. I do think that that the companies that build data centers are becoming increasingly sensitive to the energy consumption question, in part because for them it's a cooling question as well, and very difficult. So, you know, we are moving towards different types of siting of data centers. Do I think in the end that a data center is more or less energy consumptive or greenhouse gas producing than a kind of a comparable industrial facility that produces the same value added? That's a very difficult question to sort of answer at this point. But I think that if I'm thinking about, if I'm assuming that there's economic growth, and I'm in favor of economic growth, I think that it's easier to imagine data-driven growth being more environmentally friendly than industrial-driven growth, or even service sector-driven growth. But this is still an open and very important question.
You're right, Michael. Just to inform you, the foundation team is started to conduct a study because we have seen some paper in the U.S. and university in the U.S. that it seems to be that the consumption of energy and the production of CO2 can increase with the use of internet. And in particular, not only for data center, but also for the edge, for the periphery, for the network, and for the usage of this stuff. And this is so we are doing that. Before to give the word to Professor Polillo and then to Professor Prini, I just want to comment because nobody Michael has raised 3 or 4 major issues. One is, of course, the economic growth, the measurable data on the GDP, but also the other is the trade, the employment, and also you can comment again the privacy versus growth and all the issues related to that. Now I give the word to Alberto Polillo.
Yes. I'm a professor at the University of MilanoBicocca, and my background is software engineering. Okay. And presently I'm teaching human-computer interaction and especially the impact of the internet on the users. So I will stay for the moment on the first issue. It's clear to me the economic value of data. I'm not an economist, so I don't think this idea on how to measure it and how to tax it. I think that then we'll, at least in Italy, find a way to tax it.
I think we have to find a way to measure it.
To our government. But I have a preliminary problem. So I think that we have a complex taxonomy problem. So what is data? We have products, we have services, and we have data. And what are data? I think that not everything that is immaterial can be considered data. For example, I'm giving a simple example. You have spoken about the big mobile app economy. So it's not clear to me why apps can be considered data, because we have some paradox here. So we have this thing which command the video, which is a product that is tangible, but I can have exactly the same thing within my iPhone, It is basically the same object which takes different forms. But for this simple fact, it doesn't change its nature. So I will consider it. Can
I address that one really quickly?
A big number of apps.
Can I address that one? You'd have to go back to a factory to reproduce that one.
Yeah.
Okay. It would cost you something. The one that you're holding in your left hand would cost you something to reproduce. You'd have to go, whereas the app could be very easily reproduced for virtually nothing across multiple software devices. And so that's the sense in which these, from an economic point of view, those two objects serve the same function but behave very differently. So this is not a
Yes. This opens the issue of how to attach an economic value. I'm still speaking about taxonomy, but let me go on to the taxonomy. So, what is data? It is, some things are clear to me. So, structured data in databases, if they are valuable, they are data. Publisher content, like videos, the content of books, the content of music, this can be considered. I don't know if data or information, but this is a material thing which is not a product, which is not a service, is certainly data. So there are a number of user-generated content which are undoubtedly considerable as data. For example, reviews, user-generated reviews to products, to services. Some user-generated logs of events coming around. These can have an economic value, considerably. But there are some things which are borderline, and I wonder about software. Because, well, first, algorithm. Maybe that algorithm may be considered data. But software products, how do you consider them? Because it seems that depending on the use that you make of the products, they can be considered either products or infrastructures or data. For example, open source software. If you use open source software to implement a service, so you use it to implement your infrastructure to which you supply a service, in my opinion, this could not be considered data. But if you put the open source component on the net, so you in a sense, you allow other people to use it to make other things. So open source components in this sense could be considered data. So software is borderline, and given the enormous economic value of the software industry, this I think can be probably the most important issue from the taxonomy point of view. What I don't think you mentioned in the final some measures of the IP traffic over the net. I don't think that this can be either an approximation of the economic value, because IP traffic mixes a lot of things. So this is a preliminary taxonomy problem. So I will stop here for now.
Some comments?
Very interesting comments, but let's keep them.
Okay, I'm a computer scientist with a mathematical background, teaching digital communication to political scientists at the University of Milan. And so I'm not an expert on any of the subjects that I just mentioned. In my opinion, many of the issues that have been raised so far are actually part of a more general question that sounds like the following one, quote unquote, whether GDP is a suitable measure of a country's economy and why not. In fact, I think that the current definition of GDP, which is a kind of monetary-based definition, has nothing to do with the value of produced by a country in terms of goods, services, data, or whatever. My personal opinion is that GDP should actually be a measure of energy, which is the energy used to build up the organization of the society we live in, minus the energy that has gone into heat, the energy that has been dissipated to create this organization. So the delta is the value of the society. But I mean, if we start a discussion on this issue, I think we could probably.
but as this room gets hotter, it will generate more GDP.
When people will go away and there will be no GDP.
That's right.
So yeah, I would just have to mention a couple of technical issues that are related to what you have presented. And one is has to do with the way GDP is computed, is valued, from the viewpoint of where goods and services are produced or delivered. And in fact, there is a difference. There has been a difference between the Marxist approach and the Western approach, because in the Marxist statistical system, prices were CIF based, not SOB based, and so the cost of logistics was part of the price of goods and services. Now we are raising a problem about data logistics, which means transmission, storage, delivery, and at the moment it's not clear to me how these costs should be accounted to either production or consumption or to completely different item in the national accounts. For example, a company like Akamai is one of the main data distribution companies. I mean, are they creating value or are they just moving things produced by others and consumed by others? The second issue has to do with the following question: whose GDP is the GDP related to production and consumption of data? So when I click on a button on a user interface, I am actually producing data that Google is collecting and storing. Is the value generated by me when I click on the button, or is the value generated by Google when it collects the information that I'm clicking on that button? And similar examples can be provided for consumption. Why is this issue relevant? Because, I mean, many financial issues in the current work are actually related to the amount of GDP generated by the different countries. For example, government loans, government debt. And the split between producer and consumers of the GDP that you have estimated to be 0.07% or whatever, actually affects international policies. Okay.
Let me actually, you raised some very, very interesting points. Let me just address two of them. One is the Akamai. Akamai is a very interesting case. So Akamai does data distribution, installs content delivery networks, say, across Europe, so that if the Olympics are happening in Asia, or a soccer match, they're sort of rebroadcast. Now, why are these content delivery networks necessary? It's because you need to bring the data closer to people to make them valuable. You can think of the value that data by Akamai is not about the data itself, but about moving it closer. All right? This is very important because it helps understand. So what Akamai basically is, Akamai is the equivalent of a shipper, moving the data to where, you know, it's the implementer of the trade rather than the trader. That's the right way to think about the second example you described about Google as well. You're clicking on Google, you're downloading you know, a piece of data that originated somewhere else around the world. You know, we can count the number of pages on Google that are US-based and European-based and Asia-based. It's roughly 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So you're downloading something that may have originated in the US or Asia. It is much closer to the legs or less. It's more valuable. So what you are getting from that transaction is actually the transport mechanism that of Google bringing the data closer to you. Now, an interesting question is whether the value of the access to that closer data is worth more or less than the data that you are contributing. See, I think there's a giant free ride going on in this world, which is why you're seeing some of the odd, interesting growth patterns that you are. The mere ability to sort of set up a data center means that all at once you have access to a whole bunch of information from the rest of the world at a closer range than you had before. My guess is, and we're in the process of calculating it, that value in the aggregate is greater than the value of the data being collected. Now, the interesting question in the fellow left here. So this is creating a giant surplus, okay, in the Marxist sense. Okay, sorry, the act of building a data center these days, the initial data centers create not marginal ones, the initial ones. But it's a giant surplus because you have access to data that you didn't have before. The surplus is far larger than the amount that Google is spending on building a data center. It's also far larger than the amount that Google is collecting on advertising from using your data. So the interesting and important question is, who is collecting the surplus? Okay, so really what we're doing at this point is we're not fighting over the conventional, oh, are you getting paid for your data? Because the fact is, you're getting all this access that far exceeds the amount of the value of your piece of data. We're fighting about a different question. Is all this surplus that's being created, how much of it goes to which country, to consumers, to governments, and so forth? So if you think about that as kind of the model, you sort of understand that a lot of the discussions about, oh, they're taking my data, it's actually not the right discussion. The discussion is there's a surplus out there that is being created. Okay, it's being created because of the actions of these large companies. Okay, it's a beneficial surplus, and so then the question is how to ensure that the surplus continues to be created, because that's what's beneficial to everybody. At that point, I sort of throw my hands up and say, countries have the right to sort of say, okay, we're going to behave in such a way to sort of reduce the amount of surplus because we value privacy at a greater level. They have the right to sort of say, okay, you know, we want to work out a system of taxation that preserves the surplus. From my perspective, you know, the reason why I sort of kind of get so emphatic about the value of the data-driven economy is it's almost a classic positive win-win. There's no lose going on. It's a question about there's a giant win going on, and how we're going to distribute the giant win to everyone. You know, you need to make sure that the game is going up to the sort of the data companies that they keep building these replication facilities, which are the equivalent of the factories for the new information age. Because what happens is that if you can regulate them in such a way that they go and they build it somewhere else. Okay, and that's capitalism. You could sort of say, okay, we as a country, we are going to build our own data centers at a large cost. So there's all, you know, I think in the sense of surplus creation, And these companies are only doing a beneficial thing. Discussions in terms of what's being taken is very misleading. There's many important issues that need to be discussed in the data-driven economy. Okay. But those are not going to go away. Taxation is an important issue. How do you sort of tax in such a way that you do not discourage the creation of these surpluses? How do you make sure that countries are part of the growth, the surplus? To me, the easiest thing to do is to keep the surplus from accruing in your country, okay? By saying, no, we're not going to welcome. We're going to tax and regulate data centers. Okay, well, then you're saying we are taxing and regulating the creation of large amounts of surplus. We'll go somewhere else, okay? Or you could sort of say, all right, let's understand what's going on here. Now, you raised the question of a sort of a Marxist interpretation, right? I'm not going to touch the term Marxist here, but I will say that there's ways of thinking about this that kind of make, you're going back to things that kind of make more sense. The data has value, whether or not somebody is paying money for it. And money is not necessarily the only stretch of value. I would say that this is, on this phone, I would just basically say that there's no doubt in my mind that building a data center, okay, creates, should be encouraged, should not be taxed, should not be regulated in a way that would discourage it. People need to understand that. At that point, you should say whatever people need to do to sort of make them happy. But what you're doing is you're exchanging a very small amount of data for a very large amount. And that's a positive thing.
But other than taxes, there is a problem of the amount of GDP attributed to the country. Because, data centers are all built in Iceland, 200,000 inhabitants, and their per capita GDP will go up to trillions of dollars.
No, the data, in that case, the GDP should be registered at the place where the gains are taken, and the gains are taken at the point of consumption. Okay? This is why I'm you're active. When you're trading, I said I wasn't going to use the word Marxist, but I also said, okay, that we're in a world in which the structures that we built in the 1930s for measuring, thinking about globalization, if you sort of look on the PPI website, you'll see actually we just ran a conference on measuring the impact of globalization, separate from the whole database. Okay, we basically said in a world of supply chains, sort of attributing where production is taking place is very difficult. Okay, that the conventional statistics are substantially mismeasuring where it is. That actually Chinese production is much larger than it looks in the conventional databases, and so forth. So this is all part of what world we live in. A world of globalization. We live in a world of data. Okay, what where, as a policy measure, what are we trying to encourage? I would argue that the more access to data that you have as a country, the more likely you are to be successful.
There's just an example of was mentioned about that. You said that in some cases, most of the value is actually created by companies doing data distribution, like Akamai, and then data producing, or
I don't know. I didn't say most of it. That's what they basically, but not that. I say Akamai is the data distribution.
Anyway, I have a very specific example describing this phenomenon. I had a student who did. He was the technical project manager of the project, the website of the Turin Winter Olympics in 2006, and what had happened previously at the previous Olympic Games was like this. In Aspen, the system was built by Microsoft, cost $12 million, and it didn't work. By didn't work, I mean that at the beginning of the second week, when most of the data is produced and consumed, the system just collapsed. So it was of no use for 2-3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, week 2. Same thing happened in Athens. The project there was done by IBM. They invested $20 million, and same thing happened. Entering for the first time, the website worked at all times, even in peak periods, and that was because the decision they made was not to have queries computed on the basis of the user's request, but to pre-compute all possible queries, to calculate the results, and to distribute data or results worldwide via API. The total value of the project was 4.5 million euros, which was divided exactly into two pieces, one for the journalists, the data producers, and one for the technical infrastructure, so about 15% of what it cost Athens not to provide certain steps. And that was just data replication.
Sorry.
Oh, come on.
Very, very excited idea. How do you compute only 5% increase of scale? What are the criteria you use to evaluate, to give a value to the business case?
Which one are you talking about?
The
GDP. Okay. So in that case, what I did was I looked at the increase in use and time used spent on broadband, the increase in time spent mobile broadband, the increase of users for sort of various websites and so forth, and multiplied that by the base of the monetary base of the telecom and so forth. I would consider this to be a set of heroic assumptions. Okay, I would consider it to be not much worse than what some of our national accounting agencies do in some cases. I was looking at consumption rather than investment and trade. My sense is that the true number, if I had included those in, would have been considerably larger. So from my perspective, I thought that was sort of a reasonable result. Could someone else get different results? Absolutely. Is the underlying growth rate of usage of smartphones and broadband, if you sort of look at data consumption rising at a rapid rate? The answer is yes. Does that show up anywhere in conventional statistics? No. Could I have picked a different base and gotten a different answer? Yes. So I would say that this is correctly characterized as a preliminary result. It is consistent with results gotten by, say, Professor Eric Bernhofsen in MIT, sort of in the same order of magnitude. Basically, if you sort of look at people's time budgets and how they change and kind of value them by a rough measure of what their time is worth, this is kind of about what you get. So that was the procedure there. I'm looking, this was the initial attempt in terms of getting an order of magnitude. What I know for a fact is that no GDP statistics out there in developed countries account for the increase in speed of broadband in their measure of GDP. They do not account for the increase in consumption of data by companies. They don't increase the trade in data by everyone. So that's what I stand on.
Before I move to Sanchez, I'd like to let them in your details for everybody here, what our national statistical institution is doing in order to address some of these issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Yes, this discussion is very challenging.
Nadia is working. He starts and maybe you can
sorry. Good morning, everybody. I'm Nadia, and I'm a senior researcher of the Italian National Institute of Statistics. That is, I don't know if you know that, but it's the main producer of official statistics of the country. And he's producing official statistics together with other parties, of course, that belong to the national statistical system. And in some way, these guidelines and practices that are shared by the community. And so this discussion is very challenging, and yesterday I tried to say something. There are two sides of this question that is very huge, as you're seeing. And one is how to measure this data, how to measure this new disruptive, huge amount of data on an economic point of view. So how to consider them in the GDP, or how to measure their contribution to our economic growth. And in this sense, the Institute is working very hard and sharing methods with among the European Union, of course, among Eurostat, and also at international level, discussing in general how to measure intangibles and how to consider intangibles as an important, of course, central part of our economic growth. And we are doing that, starting from of course, the standard. I think I can consider that as a standard classification of the assets of the intangibles. And what can I say, less theoretical, more practical, that at the end of the next year, ECT, the first result for Italy on ECT as intangibles and their contribution on the GDP will be disseminated. And this happens also in other European countries. And we are also working hard on the other aspects, like databases, and software and everything. So we are dealing with that. And this is one aspect. On the other hand, as you told before, Michael, I can't remember a standard statistical data, standard statistics, something like that. Yes, we are dealing as producer of statistics with big data and with the other aspects. And this is very challenging too, because we are trying to, what we are trying to do is trying to extract value from this cloud. I don't know if I can show some pictures for that. We represent this like cloud, and the meaning is that I don't know, a rain can be accessed, but also the sun can come out. So we are really working out on that. And what we are doing is to try to use, to extract value from this sometimes humor, sometimes confusion, to improve our production. That's statistical production, so it's different from other kind of production. So we're doing that to improve in different ways. And the main ones are, for example, to try to use big data to improve our data collection system. So the step of data collection that is at this stage as not standard, I like to see it can be misleading and understanding, but as its usual level, very, very developed and updated, because we use, of course, all the media you know to make this data collection phases very modern, very sensitive, and so on and so on. For example, we use web collection, data collection, general data collection that is very modern and very developed. So this is one of them. And in this case, the easier way to use this data is to substitute the standard usual data collection using, for example, apps from your mobiles or applications using your laptop and so on. Of course, in this case, I need to ask for permission because there is the other aspect you highlighted at the beginning that is quite interesting, and for, of course, for National Institute of Statistics, maybe it's one of the core points. So I don't know how to face this trade-off, but there is one. And in my opinion, it's not so difficult to balance to find a balance between respondents, users' needs, and producers. So it's not exactly. We need to say that we have to say that. And so asking permission, we can substitute this data collection, collecting data directly from this kind of data. And this is all one way, but there are also others. I don't know if I can go on that or.
Maybe we can go. Okay.
Faccio Giuseppe, in Italy we are a vendor of innovative analytical platforms. And let me briefly come back on the differences between goods, service, and data, and highlight another aspect regarding these differences. And in my feeling, one of the main aspects is that there is the absence of the predictable value of the data, because sometimes when we are producing data, when we are storing that data, and even if on our own data in our company, we cannot predict the value of this data. And value comes from how you will use the data, probably in a future, not near, but in a long future. And the way you will use data are related to ideas, so that in a way you are. We can speak about the value of ideas, and the thin boundary between goods and intellectual property, for example. So introducing new theme of discussion.
I think that's a very useful point, because if we don't know what the value is, what's the level that we think about it, that kind of gets back to the cost of production, okay, thinking about it in that way. But that's a very interesting point. I wanted to just come back to something that you were saying, which is that I think that people don't understand the relationship between big data and then the government surveys. Okay, you actually need government surveys to make sense of the big data. You need kind of a yardstick. And so what happens is, in the work that I did on the app economy, I used help wanted ads as a way of sort of a microscope to sort of pull out the app-related jobs. But I needed government surveys to help me interpret and calibrate this data. And so what happens is, the way that people get into trouble is by using big data by itself without the calibration. And I think that that's kind of the place where we're going to sort of end up eventually, and it's going to take time to get there, is that the government statistical agencies will focus on producing reliable yardsticks that can be used to sort of interpret the big data that is coming from other places, and that will require a different set of surveys and activities and so forth, but it'll require the same kind of concentrated focus on consistency. Because, as you said, big data is produced, I can't remember, as a result of other activities. And people can change what they're doing. Businesses can change what they're doing tomorrow, and also the data they're producing changes. And so this goes to your question of the predictability of the value of data. So what happens is we live in a world in which the data, the meaning of it, the value of it shifts. Right? I think this kind of helps me clarify why I'm counting data rather than information. Okay, and I've had many dialogues with the government statistical agencies. I'm very close to them, and the head of the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, said to me once, he said, "Michael, you keep wanting to count real things and not the dollars." Okay, and that's kind of about it. I want to count something I can count, which is data flows, and then figure out how to interpret that afterwards. Because we don't know whether, it's the use that sort of says what the value is going to be, and we can't determine that. So I would the place where I would come down to is I'd put more funding into statistical agencies rather than less, because the more that we can have calibration tools, the more valuable the big data becomes to give us detail that we can't get any other way because it's intrusive. In the U.S., forget about all this current process. In the U.S., if a statistical agency or any government agency wants to do a survey, they have to get approval from the Office of Management and Budget, the President's office. They have to get that approval, okay, because they don't want to impose too much burden, okay, on the companies. Now, collecting information, big data, as a result of data exhaust doesn't put too much burden on, but they don't know what it really means. And this is where the statistical agencies come in. So from my perspective, I want to count the flows and then bring in other data to help me kind of make sense of it.
Davide Tosi, I'm a researcher from the University of Insubria and scientist at Vodafone. Let me start from two case studies or success stories that I was involved in the last 2 years in my research activity. The first one is related to micro-targeting and micro-marketing project in a political campaign in a similar way Obama did in his last re-election. So the use of big data and the network to retrieve information and to provide better targeted campaign to the people. And the second one is a 10 million European, very big European project about green mobility. And also in this project, we use a lot of data to elaborate, for example, traffic prediction from cellular networks. So, for example, we discussed about every time we switch on our mobile phone, we use data, but also we produce data. So in this case, for example, I'm exchanging data between my mobile phone and the network. And we can use this information, for example, to elaborate and predict vehicular traffic information or how people move in the city area, how people interact with points of interest and stuff like that. In these two projects, we don't have technological problems, hardware problems, scalability problems to manage this huge quantity of data. And we don't have also algorithmical problem or mathematical problem or statistical problem to define the models that are able to predict vehicular traffic or other problems. We have three issues. The first one is data availability, because, for example, in the European project, we have public transportation authorities such as ATM Milano or Barcelona authorities or Helsinki public transportation authorities, and it's very hard to have data, for example, about public about timetables, about delays, about data about pollution in a city and stuff like that. The second problem is privacy issues, because each country in the project has its privacy regulation and laws. So it's very hard in a cross-country project to understand who is the responsible of the data, who is the owner of the data, who is the final user of the data. And so in this case, we have also to take into account these aspects. And the last one is trustability and quality of data. So we use in the project also social network data. So for example, tweets exchanged between a user, and we collect this huge amount of information. And we semantically elaborate this information to provide aggregated data on, for example, disruptive events or unexpected events in the city. And the problem that we have is to understand the trustability and the quality of the data, because the data comes from the cloud, and we have to understand the data that are trustable and the data that are not trustable. So I think that also these three aspects can have a big impact on economic value of data, and I think that we have to face the next years also on these three issues.
That's very important, yes. Fabrizi, Banca d'Italia, Italian Central Bank. And I'm an IT man, not an information. What did you say? I'm an IT man. Oh, I'm not an information. Congratulations. I keep much more valuable. Yes, but the Italian economy is much important. That's Central Bank. And the people questions related to the difference between data and information and the text related to the data. And the problem is how to avoid that data can be duplicated. To put the value of the data 2 times, 3 times, and so on in the balance sheet of a company. Because if data became a value, so I can put in my balance sheet and duplicate or so on with income.
Yeah, I think in the, you know, with the wrestling act going on at this point about valuing the data for tax reasons, okay, where the line is, in the OECD is pursuing is that data should be valued at arm's length. Okay, and for tax reasons, that is to say at a market price, and then what the internal price is to the company of replicating this across different countries is close to 0. So right now, I mean, we're wrestling, you know, the tax issues that, and I actually have a paper coming out on this soon, which is, you know, this is actually, you know, there's a lot of things that I've sort of tackled in my career, but every time I tackle international taxes, I say 2 things. I say, boy, this is hard. And then I say, maybe I should just go become an international tax accountant and make a lot of money because it's so complicated. Okay. But, you know, the thing is that we're dealing with not tax evasion in the classic sense. Okay. We're not. These companies are following the tax laws. What we're dealing with is the fact that this data, in some sense, has 2 actual prices. One is the arm's length market price that you sell it for, and the other is the price of replication within the company. From the point of view of economic growth, you'd rather value it at the low price because that's what leads to the replication and the creation of surpluses around the globe. So frankly, for the purpose of economic growth, you'd rather tax it at as low a price as possible, and then you get as much creation of these easy to duplicate intangibles as possible. And that's the world we're in now. Okay? If you could effectively tax the creation and transmission of this data, think about what would happen if you sort of tax data every time it crossed national borders. You would have much less data flowing, and in some sense you would have much less growth. You might have more revenue,
All right. So what's going on at this point is this kind of it's not a bad debate. It's a very, very interesting debate about how we think about this for tax purposes, how we think about this for company purposes. Because, for example, if I take a company, okay, and then what happens is I separate it into two companies in two different countries. Well, I'd like there to be the same data in both of them. That would be the best for the world economy. But then it looks like I've created sort of value out of nothing. So there's no good solution at this point. The way to think about the work that I'm presenting today is taking a sort of big axe and kind of chopping at it, and sort of getting to sort of acknowledge that once you start thinking about data as a separate entity, goods and services plus data, it does actually have some implications for fiscal policy, it has some implications for central bank policy, it has implications for trade policy, it has some implications for data privacy policy, right? I know that, for example, intangibles, they were, the initial definition of intangible assets came out of the Federal Reserve and was supported by Chairman Bernanke at that point. And within a few weeks, the Bureau of Economic Analysis in the U.S. is going to explicitly add R&D and other intangibles to GDP. Okay? Now, this is something that's being followed by other statistical agencies as well. But that has an effect. It adds, I can't remember the number, it adds like $500 billion to U.S. GDP. And it will, in fact, change the shape of certain downturn. And so all of this is kind of going on, at the same time, and we can't shy away from difficult conceptual issues simply because they're difficult, because, in fact, this is where the global economy is going. And if we want to answer the question about where the jobs are, where the production is, so we have to deal with it.
Before to open the open discussion, do you want to make a break or not? No. Do you want to make a break? We organize to have some coffee, and then it's coming, and then we can continue. Okay. I just want to ask you, Marco, you said at the beginning you want to maybe to come back a little bit more in your conversation about privacy and data protection.
Very important.
Can you please comment on that?
Well, I mean, look, what we have at this point in Europe is two things going on simultaneously. One is the consideration of tighter data privacy regulation, and the other is economic stagnation and slow job growth. Now, for me, and I've not written about this for the U.S., I see regulations in general, not just data privacy regulations in general, as being one of the prime causes of slow growth in the developed countries. Not because regulations are bad, but because we've laid on a lot of different levels of regulation without being able to figure out how to undo old regulations that don't make sense anymore. If it was up to me, and I had to make a choice between would I pass an increased data privacy regulation at this moment in time in Europe? No, I won't. Okay? I don't quite see why it's essential at a time when Europe is trying to develop a new round of competitors to sort of take advantage of data, why it's important to make things even tougher for job-creating industry. But you know what? I'm American.
No, but you're right, but it's not so easy because also the economical agents in the market where you are looking, for example, telecommunication systems and so on, operators, are thinking that regulation is one of the main strategic assets that they can use. And so even if the state would make a very liberal policy, the European telecoms would say, no, we want that you regulate those over-the-top actors that are...
That's a different question. Okay, it's a different need. From my perspective, and what I meant to say that I'm American is that I don't get a vote here. Okay, and I don't, and so that from, you know, if you look at the U.S. does certain things that look very peculiar from the point of view of Europe. Okay, we could probably spend all day sort of enumerating them. You know, very crazy healthcare system and so forth. And so, from my perspective, I don't quite understand. I mean, the way that when I give my talks, I'm very straightforward. So saying, look, this is the way I see it. You know, people need to make the decisions that they need to make. Okay, regarding these very important questions. Is this apocalyptic? I mean, the history is that you know, the history is that, at least the way that I read it, is that standard of living in developed countries more or less move together no matter what, unless there's war or major financial crisis. Okay, so that in normal times, you know, you have all sorts of different policies, and then the sort of the wave front of economic development moves together. The fact of the matter is that you know, the IT revolution spread from the U.S. to Europe. It didn't take that many years. The catch-up factor is very quick. Okay, and so is it apocalyptic to adopt privacy policies? It's not apocalyptic. It's not, you know, at the margin, is it going to make a difference? You know, the difference that it makes is partly philosophical and partly political. Where, you know, where as a country, where as a region, do countries make their bets? Do they make it based on regulation, or do they make it based on growth and innovation? To me, it's a philosophical, political question as much as it is an economic question. The U.S. makes its bets on innovation and therefore gets a certain set of results. I don't know what, I mean, I can't quite read this. We've done several conferences in Europe. We have had a lot of people come speak. I respect the viewpoints of people who come speak. The decision's going to be whatever the decision is going to be. Okay? Do I think that it makes a lot of sense from a growth point of view to implement tighter privacy standards at this point? No. But that doesn't mean that that's not the final answer.
So eventually people, yeah, you did it in Italy, the privacy versus growth is more on the privacy, of course. So there is no discussion about that.
Well, let me.
What were you speaking maybe?
Not only formally.
Well, let me ask you a question. I mean, is this? I don't know if I've ever asked this question. Suppose that you knew, okay, that by passing tighter privacy standards, you'd give up a percentage point of GDP. Okay, you know. Is that a decision you'd be willing to make at this point? Okay. Suppose that by passing tighter privacy standards, you give up a percentage point in job growth. I'm not even going to sort of ask people to sort of raise hands. It's not appropriate. Okay. But these are kind of the questions that sort of, if I look at the U.S., all right, and I say that the data sector is generating jobs at 10% a year. Okay, and I say that, you know, in a lot of areas, this is where the real growth is coming from, directly or indirectly, and that the U.S. would have slower growth without it. And you know, it's a convincing argument from my point of view.
It's coming, but you know, we are a strictly incoherent country.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
I can give you a simple example that is. The only labor market sector that is absorbing all the laureate diploma having people is computer science, ICT. We are one university having a course on ICT, and we are within the northern part of Italy the one with the highest growth rate. But next year we will decrease the number of students that we enroll of 1/3, due to the fact that we are a small faculty, and there is new rules fixed in law say that with that small faculty you can get more than 300 students. Wait a moment. So that is quite interesting, because when this happened, the University of Lugano, that is in Swiss, opened a campaign in Italy to say, come on, you to Swiss. That is, and everyone is saying every day that young people employment is the most important thing for that we must make cash program. But the simple thing was telling us, are you able to take more students with that small faculty since you are being successful? And we could negotiate probably, not immediately, yes, but you should give us at least peanuts. But instead, the rules were you must go down to 300, no more 420, 300.
So what do you make of this?
We have a new rector. In September, we are going to the rector telling you must go to the telling them that next year at least we should have more students.
But the same thing happens in the United States. What happens is that the Department of the question, for example, was the Federal Trade Commission going to sue Google for antitrust activities? And there's the history is that when the U.S. government goes after major corporations, it tends to slow innovation. That would have been a very bad thing for Google and probably for the U.S. economy, maybe for the global economy. So yes, I agree on the incoherency. Part of you put your finger. Part of the reason why I'm writing these papers, okay, is to sort of highlight the role of the data-driven sector in a way that people like you could point to and say, look, we are part of the fastest-growing part of the economy. Because right now you don't have the data to make your case.
You agree, Michael, and the other people. We have here Giuseppe Maciago is a lawyer, but it's a non-standard lawyer as the Bocconi. It's a lawyer that is, he works in a think tank in Italy that is technology and law. So it's
okay.
I asked him to just to give a brief overview for you for kind of the situation today in Italy and probably similar to other countries, about the debate about privacy and data security.
Everybody, I'm Santiago, I'm a lawyer, and yes, I'm quite expert on IT law. I'm also at the Università on IT law. I don't want to bother you on privacy issue. I think that the discussion until now is really more interesting than the privacy or privacy issue. The only issue where we're quite concerned and is the possibility to make social control with the big data. So this is what my fear, my big fear. If you think that perhaps you know that software, Michael, the name is Predpool. Is a software made by the Los Angeles Police Department, and it's quite interesting about the use, the combination of the use of big data and open data, what the researcher before said. I think that if we combine this data and we don't take care, not of privacy, because we don't. Privacy is a risk from an economic perspective, and I agree. But it's the fundamental right of the citizen and the individual is not a risk. It's absolutely more important in a certain sense. So the problem is how we can stop the possibility to control, to make a social control of the citizen. And the PRISM, the Datagate issue that we had last week is another example that we had about this phone. So I don't want to talk about privacy or privacy. I prefer to talk, this is the point, this is the big point that we have. And then also I'm a consultant of Google here in Italy from human perspective. And I tell you that I'm quite sure that the US approach is not what we read in the journal, and I don't think that the position of the big provider company, I don't tell about how the big provider company is to give the data so easily, but we cannot exclude the risk in the future to have this situation. So this is my point of view.
Yeah. I tend to sort of agree with you, basically. I'm much more worried about what you call social control than I am. And this is, if I had to sort of say what my fear is going forward, it would be what you said, okay? The social control by government as opposed to the corporate sector, which kind of baffles me a little bit about people who think the other way around. And the fact that there's been less attention on the data regulation to the military police side than there has been to the corporate side. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen in the U.S. at this point. As you know, the majority of U.S. citizens, when they poll, basically support, okay, what happened. Right? There is not a big groundswell of opposition. Probably there won't be unless there's another comparable scandal. Okay. So, but then, I was recently discussing this with a journalist and thinking about, well, what should we be looking for going forward if we're to sort of see that, what would be our red flags going forward? Okay. What is the way to sort of stop this? What is the way to sort of supervise this? What does it look like from the point of view of the government, of other governments, and so forth? So this is a very difficult set of questions, which is kind of separate from what I'm talking about, but I agree with you. I sort of worry more about that. This kind of comes in when people sort of ask me what I'm worried about from an economic point of view. They expect me to say inflation or something like that. I say, no, the thing that worries me is war. Okay? Big, destructive changes. Okay? Next to war, everything else kind of pales. And so this is the same kind of thing.
Would it be possible to provide something like, I don't know, privacy by design in big data analysis? Yes,
well, I think that depends on what you're sort of thinking about. Okay? We're sort of equating big data with the privacy. Here's my question. Okay? If you notice my own behavior, if you use Google Chrome, you have the option with one click to sort of use a window that doesn't track you. Mm-hmm. It's true in other browsers as well, usually one click. And the question is, who uses them? Okay, do people sort of manifest that this is something that they care about? And then you come to the question about, is the privacy going to be automatically turned on? So you kind of run through a sort of a set of different questions. But let me give you sort of one. So I use a lot of help wanted data. Help wanted data is based on want ads that are publicly put out by companies. Now, it's an interesting question. If I put out public data, is that private anymore? All right? And can I use it? Right? Have you given up your rights to privacy by making it public? Does it still belong to you? There's a whole bunch of things that kind of go along with that. My feeling is still, okay, I'm pro-growth, okay? Pro-growth, pro-job creation, and keeping in mind the social control problems.
It's a question of self-awareness.
I think in the end, okay, what do you do with the fact that most people, even when they don't behave in a way that makes it look like they value privacy? Okay, so why don't we start with that? And then you sort of have two different answers to that. One answer is, well, we know that they should value privacy, and so let's make sure that the default is that they get privacy. The other is actually to sort of say, well, they don't behave as if they value it. Let's make the default that their behavior. And this kind of gives two different sort of views of the world. One is, what do you do for people that you impose regulations on people to make them better off, even if it's not what they would choose for themselves? That gets to a sort of a philosophical question. Frankly, if I had to sort of do that, I would put my energy into climate change. Okay, than I would into data privacy. If I had to devote, if I had to sort of, say which issue is more irreversible and has more long-term effects, and where people's individual incentives may not line up with the correct global incentives. I don't see the same externalities in privacy. I don't know. I mean, this is, look, I spend a lot of time talking to people, and part of what I'm doing is I'm sort of saying, look at the data-driven sector. Look how much it's growing. Look what the gains are. Okay? You got the information? Go make your decision. Okay, that's kind of my perspective on it. And then I wonder, where that fellow just left. I wonder, how it is you can make these sorts of decisions for a university where you're sort of closing down. You're reducing the area that, where you have a lot of jobs. It doesn't make any sense, all right? It's consistent in a larger sense with the sort of behavior that we see among politicians of not actually being terribly interested in growth, right? People are behaving, politicians are behaving as if they are not terribly interested in growth. They behave as if they're not terribly interested in innovation. So in that sense, this is consistent with that. From that perspective, I don't like it. Okay, I see that in the U.S. as well, in a less virulent form. Okay, politicians don't behave as if they're pro-growth and pro-jobs.
Yes, Cosimo, a total open knowledge. To be honest, a premise and a question. To be honest, I don't like the term big data. I think it's totally confusing and useless at the end. Just me say, what is big? Big is a relative term. What is big for me is not big for Google. Which is the share of for this? One data, 10 data, one data.
Are you asking the question? I don't ever use, and when I can avoid it, I use the term.
Okay, great.
Sometimes they just say that it's shorthand that people understand. Okay. But I write paper after paper where big data.
Another thing, people say that big data means real time. What is real time? For me, real time is just an information in a second. For machine, real time is a fraction of a second. Totally useless.
I agree.
Thanks. The other thing is, probably I have not understand correctly, but I'm not sure what you say when you say data. Let me give you an example of cat videos. When you say we are measuring cat video, you mean we are measuring the quantity of bits that flow in the network. We are measuring the value of views of this video. We are measuring the way of the advertising pay for the able to see these videos. Because I think that, okay, for me, data is measuring an entity. Information is, or information and knowledge is, what is the measurement? We are measuring the case of this, we are measuring the value of this object because we understand through this measurement the behavior of consumer. What we are measuring?
Okay, I like to measure data flows. That is,
the number of
there's two possible measures of data flows.
Yeah.
Okay. One measure of data flows is the number of bits that are flowing. Okay, or the whole data flow itself. So if you buy a data flow, okay, you're buying not just a set of bits. If you're measuring, for example, if you sort of measure the flow of a river. Okay, you've got the water molecules that come by today and the water molecules that come by tomorrow that may be different ones. Okay, but it's the flow. Okay, so that's one measure. The other measure is the amount of time that people spend to sort of interact with this data. And as in the case of the cat data, which we can put a time on. Okay. I do not use advertising as a measure. Advertising is a completely separate market here, okay? Completely separate from, you know, it's a whole different set of flows. It's a backflow of data, okay? You know, which is being used in a certain way. So what I'm looking at here is I'm looking very much the same model of that sort of fits GDP, okay? Where GDP is a flow. It's a flow of goods and services that are produced and consumed and used in various ways in an economy over a period of time. We don't spend a lot of time kind of looking into the flow itself, right? So, for instance, we've got a flow, and we sort of say, okay, we're going to measure this in the way we're going to measure this, and we'll sort of equate different flows in different ways through dollars. You know, the point that she's back there, okay, the point that was made before about the value of data being unpredictable, is a very, very, very important point. Because a lot of the objections that people raise is, well, you have this value, you know, the cat video is obviously less valuable than the genomics data. Okay. Well, you know, yesterday the Supreme Court just ruled that patents on genes are no longer valid. All of a sudden, that data that on the genes that may have been very valuable yesterday may be worth less than the cat video today. Okay. So partly what I'm trying to get at here is that we as a society are now being set up to sort of consume, create, use data. Our governments, similarly, for better or for worse. In some cases, you mentioned the inability to sort of get the data on public transit. Okay, you know, we want certain types of, we want our government to be open about certain data, and then there's other data we'd rather they not touch. Okay, we're sort of still working our way through that. But in each of these, it's not about what you can do with the data. The data itself has some consumption or investment or government or trade value that lies separate from its use in goods and services. And that's kind of the main point that I'm making here, because otherwise you get all wound up into this question about how much it's worth, and the difference between data and information. The truth is our networks can't tell the difference between data and information. They collect everything, okay? They collect cat videos. You know, the fact of the matter is that there's other things that maybe there's parrot videos that nobody watches. There's just as many of them. Well, you know, it could be that things change tomorrow and sort of ferrets become big, or circuses, okay, or soccer matches, or, you know, and so this is not the final resting point of any of this, because we don't know how the economy is going to evolve, but we do know that data is going to be very important, separate. And I'm all in favor of wrapping big data out of our language, but it appears every time I get put in a battle that sort of says big data in the title.
There are some comments, please.
Let me, of course, I'm interested in asking you this question, because I was really surprised to see in your presentation a strong assertion that the value of databases depends from the quality of analytical tools. And this is giving to us, like a vendor, a bigger responsibility for the future of this economy. And do you think that we have some, in a way, suggestion or thinking about how to develop better tools, better technologies?
Well, so let's think it. So this starts from the point of sort of viewing data as independent of goods and services. And so we think about, we have the data, and then what we have is what we can do with it. What we can do with it today may be different from what we can do with it tomorrow and what we can do with it the day after. It also matters where we do it, so that if we move the data closer to us, it's more valuable. And so sort of from my perspective, if I was to suddenly come up with a new analytic technique for analyzing databases that could be used across databases, this would be very valuable and would make the databases more valuable in a way that you could never imagine with building an office building. Okay, so an office building with a range of space has, you know, it has a bunch of different values to it, depending. It can sort of swing quite a bit. Say have a 50% swing in it. The value of data could be swings it could be much bigger, depending on what you can do with it. So we're sort of talking about a world in which there's a lot more processing that goes on at every step. Do we know? Do we know how much the gains can be? I mean, I am, you know, forced to raise this one about traders paying for early data. You take the same data, you sort of get a little bit earlier, sort of more valuable. I also think I'm going to sort of throw in a completely new thing at this point. Who here has heard about the Internet of Everything? Yeah. Okay. Right, so the Internet of Everything is basically what happens when you start instrumenting the real world, and you're collecting data on position, status data on everything. Okay, because as the sensors become much less expensive, and our ability to process the data becomes much higher. At that point, you sort of have the possibility of two things, both of which one is incredibly energizing, the other is incredibly appalling. Okay, the incredibly energizing part is that you can imagine all sorts of things that we can't do now, including much cheaper training of young workers, because you have a much feedback loop between what they're working on and what they're learning. And so you could sort of imagine suddenly that the training that the cost of manufacturing in developed countries goes down, that the cost of training goes down as well, and that we have a much different allocation of production across the world. The appalling part, of course, is that it increases the possibility of social control. So I think that we're at the beginning of the data revolution and not at the end of it, because once you start instrumenting the real world, the amount of data you have available goes up exponentially, and what you can do with it goes up exponentially. And I think that data analysis of sort of web analytics, even analysis of transactional stuff is just kind of a small cut. So that's your picture from yesterday. Okay, absolutely applicable. All right, and we're only at the beginning of this. Okay, we can instrument you. Scary, huh?
There are some comments, otherwise I have a question just for the audience. Maybe you have more more information than we can have. There have been some study in Italy demonstrating, as we mentioned, the work that we have done in the US, demonstrating job growth related to what we are trying to define as a data economy in Italy, as far as you know. And these have been presented to politicians. They've been done already.
Well, there are more and more meetings about data. So
no, what I mean, there have been some work done by somebody that has given some indication how.
We are in a difficult conjuncture. So now we are measuring the job disappearing. So it's difficult to stress. Which I told you about is part of the data revolution, ICT.
Our policymakers have a view of all can increase.
No, I think that there is a strong, how we can say, disattention in Italy and probably also in Europe with respect to this phenomenon. In fact, if you look at the policies that the governments are willing to do for increasing jobs are increasing construction, doing big the bridge of Sicily and so on. So that means that they are looking for traditional jobs that should be increased instead of going in a different direction, because if it were in this way, we would put a very much higher priority to the powerful networks, new generation, and so on, because that would increase the potential.
Michael, given an example yesterday, this morning, that not necessarily all the job generated by the new data economy are data scientists. You can have people that have a new job because they have to manage different kind of information, or not necessarily we are talking about, say, genius. Maybe there are certain type of jobs that.
But there is Amazon, among other things, has launched 2 months ago, and now is making the first evaluation, a new service in the Seattle area. They are selling vegetables, fruits, and so on with a 0 kilometers kilometer. So they are doing exactly the opposite of what they do with fruits. And it seems that is quite impressive. And that, if you imagine, that could be for countries like Italy and for Europe, could be very powerful, because you could increase small business and so on, using the power of the international global trade like Amazon. So I am Amazon, but I am selling you the apples that are growing here 200 meters from you. That is powerful, and could be and needs a lot of data, so it's part of this data revolution. We in Italy, there are some young people that are willing to start things of this type, but they are very, very, how we can say, slow with respect to this. But there is a big potential. That is a market that is more flexible, that is going against the globalization of the last 20 years.
Because my thinking was also in collaboration with Michael to do a sort of type of thing for Italy. They can be useful, yes, or can be create awareness or some discussion. Or
I think that my impression is that Michael is opening something and has not yet the solution, but I think that is a very important fact that we are discussing, because in any case, also people that were looking in a different direction are forced to say, how can I compare what I was thinking with what is proposing? And that is creating a sort of positive debate. That is the reason for which people were passionate here. Somehow.
And the East that produced lots of data on, of course, on the Islamic market, for example, we have a very widespread survey that is set up for survey that is completely comparable with all the EU members. So, and from that survey you can produce it, you can analyze a very large amount of data on the semester, but we also produce and disseminate other results on different survey data on ECT consumed, ECT uses, and so on. So we have lots of sources on that. The question, and one of the main objects of it is how can I say, is sending his data from policymakers. His data out from policymakers. The question is that not always policymakers can be somewhat, not always. So our president now is
being your former president now, the minister of.
So I think that this can be very positive. On this question, he will be a ministry and he can read data. So. Anyway,
familiar to that was from Washington, D.C. Lots of sirens.
There are some other comments?
Yeah.
Please.
I'm kind of confused again. We are for sure in a moment of this debate. The model we are using to measure the model of society's evolution. Some of the countries are thinking this that around the discussion. Most important topic is growth. It's still growth and measure growth on the progress. That's the big issue. And we said that what you measure depends on the theory that is beyond the measurement. That's what I need to analyze. Right? Now, what you're proposing is a new a modification, if you want, of a calculation criteria that we are using without changing the paradigms on which we analyze the society. According to some studies of standards and so on and so forth, if we keep growing at the rate we're growing worldwide, and we become to play a position in which all the world is going to be consumption 10 or 50% below the average of the developed country, we need 2.4 planets in order to sustain the economy. No way to do that. So if you look at each of the things, all the data generator, all this kind of stuff, let's assume for a moment that you are able to use intelligent data. So you reduce transportation, you have smart transportation, we reduce pollution, we reduce consumption of pollution of CO2 or whatever you want. The example that Giorgio is giving us, of course, you have better imports and maybe a lower price. So you reduce the volume of the export market and you destroy the logistic companies. So maybe that can result in a reduction of GDP. So if you use the present model and the present mindset to measure what is happening, maybe they're going to make a major mistake. It's like measuring classical phenomena using quantum physics, vice versa. So that is where the difficulty is. And of course, I guess the data has a big value, enormous value. And I listened a couple of statements when I was coming in about the horrible amount of data that is going to be generated if each of the things is going to be a reality. And all those data, if will be used intelligently, it can reduce a lot the consumption. You can reduce the footprint of humanity in the world, which means at the end, with present paradigms, that we're not growing. But the growth will become negative unless you change the model. And you have data, and you have the generation of CO2 as a negative line into the balance sheet of the company, so on and so forth. So we are present. So in that sense, I see this as a very constructive and positive effort to understand how I should change, let's say, the terms of the equation which calculates the GDP in order to keep mind the whole value of data. I mean, the value of data is huge, and there is someone is able to measure data to value that. Look at Microsoft. It's like replicating Windows costs $0. You go to buy the new version of Windows, pay $300. That's the truth. Google gives you Gmail gratis for free just because you get a lot of money from advertising. It's a well-subsidized economy. You give me the mail for free, and your advertiser give you the money to pay for my access, for my store. But I give you the data, it pays for the store, it pays for the maintenance of the data center, and so on and so forth. So, and that is what I mean, I guess. I tend to be a little bit more friendly. I wasn't really against those guys are crazy. But to reconsider this fact, take away the stupidity, measure the happiness of people, that's stupid. Okay, fine. But there are things in there that, in my opinion, need to be considered.
But when he is trying to add something to the GDP, he is going in a more stepwise.
I don't like happiness.
No, it's probably not adding happiness, but we are going in the direction of transforming the GDP.
So I think the line that you're proceeding on is in fact what was in the back of my mind. Okay, that if you move towards an economy which is less about the the production of goods and the production of certain sort of energy-intensive services, to one that's more about data that has a smaller footprint in terms of the environment, you don't want to see a negative. Okay, right now you see a negative GDP. Okay, this gives you a route for constructively, and that's a good word, sort of showing that growth is continuing despite, okay, by counting the way that people actually spend their time. So it's a way of sort of introducing, without getting involved in surveys of happiness that I'm sort of very wary of. I like the real economy. Okay, I want to see people doing things. Okay, if I tell my kids, should you try to pursue happiness or should you try to pursue contributing to society, I'm not going to tell them to go pursue happiness because they'll pursue it in whatever way they're going to pursue it. Okay, but yeah, this kind of moves you towards intangibility in a different way.
No, but that is interesting because there is a sort of paradoxical idea that is let us look to the most abstract, most new, most postmodern thing, and then what we are trying to do is that looking to it, we will raise again real economy and real life. And I think that is somehow is the right direction. We must do a lot of attempts and so on, but surely we must move people to avoid a sort of ideological war against the GDP. To say there is a problem of a better capability of reflecting and becoming sensitive to how real life is distributing resources, energies, and so on, changing in order to allow to this planet to continue to sustain people inhabiting it, because somehow at the end we go to that direction.
Some final comments?
I'd like to make a comment on your question on whether we need data scientists in Italy.
No, not only data scientists.
Anywhere. And my answer would be an emphatic yes. And the emphasis is also on the word scientists rather than technicians. But in my opinion, one of the mistakes people do is that they tend to, it's not a matter of data quality, it's a matter of the quality of data interpretation and the meaning of data. I can give you a specific example. When Corrado Passera, our former Minister of Development, Economic Development, gave a press conference about his last decree, or what was it called? Development Act, or something like that. He said that investing money into bringing internet access to faraway places such as valleys and mountains, etc., has a return of exactly 1.47 times the investment. Now, even the one may not be precise. Right? Can you imagine the 4 and the 7?
I can't be responsible for that.
The other thing is that people tend to confuse different phenomena and give an interpretation to some phenomena using models that are good for others, different phenomena. Just to give you an example, if you categorize phenomena into deterministic or probabilistic, you have resulting behaviors as classified into regular and irregular. You have a kind of two-dimensional space with 4 possibilities, which are deterministic phenomena giving regular behaviors, which is the case, for example, in Newtonian mechanics. Then you have probabilistic phenomena giving regular behaviors, which is the case of thermodynamics. You have probabilistic phenomena giving irregular behaviors, which is completely random stuff, random. But you also have deterministic phenomena giving irregular behaviors, which is the case of health. And probably 99% of the phenomena we live with are chaotic, they're not regular, meaning that phenomena are not linear. And usually data are used to come up with linear conclusions, which is wrong. The discussion that Paul Krugman has conducted on the 80s of New York Times after the Rogov issue there had all to do with interpreting data with linear models. I don't understand why they should You can even go back to more philosophical issues which have to do with the cause-effect relationship. I mean, the discussion that Paul Krugman started had to do with understanding whether debt predicts growth or negative growth, or vice versa. But it may be the case that none of the two predict the other. They just come together, but no one causes the other.
You raised some very good points. I would put it a slightly different way. I think in terms of long tail phenomena, okay, and fundamental unpredictability of innovation, and that, you know, it is a mistake to sort of look at the range of data that you have and assume that that's in fact the range that you're going to see. I don't worry about linear versus nonlinear because it really just has to do with you see a particular window, data gives you a particular window that doesn't tell you what's outside the window. I think that we, and I'm sort of struck again by the inability to sort of value, the predictability of valuing data is not a probabilistic issue. Okay? It's an issue about saying we don't know how it's going to be used in the future to turn out to be more valuable, and that we live in a world in which is fundamentally unpredictable. And what implication does that have for the way that we conduct business? You know, because you have to, basically you have to put yourself into a position to take advantage of good luck when it comes. And societies have to put themselves in a position to be able to take advantage of innovation when it comes, because you never know when it's going to come. And, you know, that means you build up skills even though you don't know quite how you're going to use them, because if you don't, you cannot take advantage of the future when it arrives. And so in some sense you do stuff which is made of silly. That's probably what I interpret the way you're saying.
Scusa, tu volevi rivoltare ancora la mano?
No, I would like to come back to the problem of privacy.
It's okay, it's on everybody's mind. It's privacy and social control. It always comes back to privacy and social control.
When there is an issue like this, we are not speaking about it. This is privacy. I understand you.
We will not tell anyone that doesn't hear.
I understand your point of view. But I don't think that, well, I would not trade 2 points of growth of GDP with a relaxation of rules about it. I would not, but it's not me. I frankly believe that nobody in Europe would trade it, nor the European Commission, nor Italy, nor the privacy, the authority of privacy. But why? Because we are in a very, very difficult situation with respect to the United States. Because first, we have a very complex history of the last century. This history, but from
you don't have to. You don't have to.
From a distant place.
No, but what I'm saying is,
sorry, but this cannot be forgotten. The last century in Europe, and I would say the last 500 years in Europe, are much, much more complicated than the history of the United States, I think. And this is the first. And second, this is not only a philosophical or ideological issue, because when the European authorities enforce privacy policies, for example, against Google, take into account that Google is not a European company, so they are making some economic, let's say, wars. Big data.
You say economic
At the same
wars.
Wars. They protect the economic interest of Europe because when you speak about big data has a sense if you have the technology of extract sense of the big data, because big data that we have now need a lot of technology to extract meaning. And I'm sorry, now Europe has not this technology. In Italy, absolutely not. But so it's a difficult economic issue.
If you consider high energy physicists, if you consider high energy physicists, they are the best knowledge extractors from data. They most of them sit at CERN, not at Battaglia near Chicago.
But with the cloud, you can buy the
But you can buy the
Can I separate out these two arguments here?
You have to have the raw data, basic data, okay, what are in the Google servers, and then the technology to extract meaning.
You can buy it. You can buy it.
You can buy the Google data, the Facebook data?
No, the technology to interpret data.
What Facebook knows about what we are doing every day? You can buy those data and you can crisscross them.
You can do everything.
You can buy?
You can buy everything, yes. The question is how much does it cost? And this is another question of cost, but you can buy it. And sometimes, like the case of Twitter, of the tweets, they are available. You can just, they are available. You can just collect, you can just organize yourself to manage to collect this data.
Right off the web.
I work in a service. So I'm very glad that is to say that.
But you are right. You are right in considering this question, because if I think, for example, want to buy data from telecom, for example, to follow. In this case, I can do that, but I need to face privacy questions and also legislative questions, because and so we need to arrive to a sort of an arrangement. But we can do that as a distance. For example, we are working on that, trying to make protocols, to make to share synergies with telecom, and then find a solution for them. Of course, in respect of the users and citizens' privacy, of course. But it's not so difficult to respect and to catch data, because when you want to a free Gmail, you have to give your consent. So you take accept, and most people are not so concerned about that, not so aware about that. Just give consensus, and I receive a free Wi-Fi, for example, free email or something. So I trust this kind of system, and in Italy.
So you don't think that there is a thing to say, if you don't give a consent, you don't get the service.
Yes, and
but you're not obliged to get
You're not obliged.
But you can say no, and it's
like when a company tells you, do you want to work to announce to your state union rights? That is, you accept it because you sign, but then you could have some doubt that there is freedom in a country where you can. No, but I think that there is one issue that is really philosophical, below the problem of privacy, is that technology has transformed the concept of state. we were in a space in which public spaces and private spaces were clearly separated. Today, we have that all the space is public. All the space is public. Because even if you are disconnecting you, then maybe that something is capturing you better. So you are really always in public. So that means that you must redefine the concept of privacy. That is what people can do with respect to your public presence. The idea is if they are using your data for firing you from the work because you are ill, that is an abuse. If they are excluding you because you are politically or religiously not good. But you need to change radically what was the concept. Because, you know, in the physical world, for example, when Fiat was spying his employees, the problem is that they made some active actions telling to the people, tell me, what does he think stem of politics, he is a good guy, who is his father, who is his mother, and so on. That was an action that was not accepted. Today, the data are there. So you
mean that physical life is different from the online life?
No, the physical life is no more the physical life because now there is the technology. Also, your house is public, and you can't avoid it. It's happening. You must reinvent the way in which you protect the privacy rights, not trying to prolongate the way in which they were considered before. Because otherwise, and the problem is that in this case, what happens is that with respect to the democratic mechanism of government, is the balance of powers mechanism of government that becomes very powerful. The big problem, for example, with respect to Obama's problem of today is who is balancing? Because the fact that Obama is using a huge amount of data, if he uses for being more precise and avoiding to create problems to normal citizens and so on, that's good. Everyone should be happy. The problem is who is controlling Obama? That is a big problem because then it may happen like the European of the suspects that they are using, by the way, also for making economic wars and so on. And you know that when in Italy we published the taxations of a large number of citizens, the system crashed. And the reason was that many Italians went there for knowing what his friends, his neighbors were gaining. And that is private use of public information. And so that is, we must protect, and the problem is that balancing of power, for example, at the supranational level is absent totally. Who is controlling WTO? No one. There is no balance of powers with respect to the fact that WTO is, but if you have only one body, then that body is without control. And so we are moving control to bodies that are not granting anything to you. So I think that we have here we have problems that are not related to the concept of data from the point of view of economy, but we have problems connected to how will be life in the networked society. And that is, I think, a very serious issue. But I think that is really more deep than how we can protect with respect to activities. We must understand how our concept of rights can be declined, can be defined in the new type of society.
Demo, let's turn to me. You didn't say nothing because one of the issues that of the open data. Open data is in the US is increasing.
He mentioned the tax return, okay, of individuals, right? So when I hear open data, okay, I hear two things simultaneously. I hear the timetables, which is open data, which is about taking data that should be open, should be well known, and putting it into a form that's more usable.
And then there's open data in terms of that sort of potentially violates people's privacy. And, you know, in the U.S., this came about recently as part of the gun control debate, when one newspaper published the addresses of all of the people in its area who had concealed gun permits. And this was very offensive to some of these people who had guns. And they were offended, and they had guns, and they weren't happy. And the editor of the newspaper later resigned from this and probably left town quickly. So for me, I consider the open data movement to be part of this larger discussion. Okay, I don't see it, you know, I think that we're going to discover that government as a data provider becomes one of its most important functions, and that we should measure government usefulness in part by the data that it provides that is socially useful. But then there's going to become these questions about what sort of data is acceptable to release. Because the thing that's different between government data and private data is that you have it's mandatory in the case of government. You know, if I really wanted not to, you know, not to have my data captured by an email provider, I could go find an email provider, a small one that would claim that they're not capturing my data. Okay, I could do that. I might have to pay some amount. That may not be free, but I could find one. Whereas I have no choice about doing my taxes. But then the question of the release of the data is another question. It's mandatorily collected and then released, and I have no control over it. See, I view these. This is where the social control question comes in. I personally sort of see this as being more worrisome than the private sector question, but then again, I'm American. Okay, you know, this is just. I mean, having, you know, I would separate your 2 points very clearly. Okay, the historical point. People have histories. They have their own histories. They have their own attitudes. The flat world is not changing this. It's just. It really upsets me though when that gets mixed up with the economic war question. Okay, because the really interesting question here is, you know, is it an economic war? Is there a creation of surplus? And is this question about the distribution of surplus? See, I don't see an economic war here. I see real war as being fundamentally different than economic war. Okay. I see that you know, when you have connections between countries, they all kind of move forward at the same rate, some a little bit slow, some a little bit faster. If I went down and sort of looked at Europe versus the U.S., I'd see some decades where the U.S. moved faster than Europe. I'd see some decades that were the opposite. Just kind of depends. And so it distresses me if the cultural privacy issues, which are real, are used as a mask for the economic warfare issues, which in some sense are a completely different kettle of fish as far as I'm concerned. Because if I've got European countries investing in the U.S., we don't consider that to be economic war, all right? And you don't want to sort of go down that route. It's kind of not a good route to go down. So the place where I come from, it's very simple, okay? People have different cultures, but I would ask, you know, if you sort of sat down and you sort of asked somebody who was out of work in Europe whether they would give up 2 percentage points of growth for privacy, whether you get the same answer or not. I don't know the answer to that question. I think probably it depends on, one of those questions, it probably depends on how it was framed. You get 2 different answers. But, you know, it's not apocalyptic one way or the other. It's not, you know, the truth is we're all so interconnected that Europe could pass a strict data privacy regulation and the difference in growth is not going to be 2 percentage points over the long run. Okay, there'll be a difference. It won't be an enormous difference. Look, these questions are going to come up again. They're going to come up again in regards to biotech. They're going to come up again in regards to the internet of everything. They're going to keep They're going to keep coming up. And the question is, you know, if you have a set of economic problems, what's the best way to solve them? If you have a set of political problems, which way do you choose to solve them? You know, we all make our own choices. Yeah. Okay, I'm not, you know, we're in different countries with different histories. It isn't, the only thing that I would say is that if people have Google envy, okay, the way to deal with Google envy is basically not to sort of chop down Google. The way is to sort of create a society that's more supportive of entrepreneurialism. So that's kind of that's the economic warfare side. And we're going to come around in some sense to thinking about things in a different way economically. And you use the term Marxist. You know, from my point of view, I can't use the term Marxist because I get thrown out of Marxism. And I wouldn't think that way, but you do have to sort of think about a world in which we think about value in a different way. And that's part of the point of thinking about data, because you can put in the environmental into it much easier in this time.
So,
can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Are we coming to an end at this point?
We have 50 minutes.
Let me just say, if anybody, you know, wants to get papers from me or anything, please give me your business card afterwards. I'll make sure you get.
I will send you an email of the people here.
That'd be terrific.
Okay. So I don't have words to thank Michael, to thank all of you. The idea is that with for the permission of the University, we try to collect all the ideas and discussions today, produce a paper, correct? To distribute to everybody here, to have your feedback and your input, and then of course with the permission that they will give available and published on the website of the foundation. So excuse me for the hot. It's becoming very hot. You know,
it was a hot topic.
It was a hot topic in a hot room. But thank you very much again, and hope we can work together for something more. Thank you.